The media has an idea of two lovers who have lost sight of each other back together. When the victim's home, he suddenly hears his ex-girlfriend Liv singing a song on the radio. It was clearly a Hualiksanzok. Laughs, then starts to laugh. Eventually the mass media project and David tries his separation anxiety by expressing dance. People decide to never talk about. The victim ends up in a story where nothing is what it seems. This is the beginning of a whole series of events to the true story of David Oost. After a tiring day I walked home under the influence of ecstasy. I lived in Wak Tibik, a small village near the Dutch border. I lived there almost my whole life. As I am listening to the radio and roll I usually like a joint. Suddenly my ex-girlfriend to Liv a song to sing on radio plus. I could clearly recognize her voice. When I heard her sing I jumped right and I started laughing. It was clearly a marriage proposal. Then Sophie began to laugh. A moment later there was nothing on the radio to hear. Music was playing again just yet. Then I felt enormous anxiety. I wondered why Sophie as her voice suddenly disappeared. They pretend it is not real. I trusted the whole situation. I really did not know well what is expected of me. Therefore I am about to start a fight. The DJ played music which I had clearly understood that I was dancing when I was expressing my fear of abandonment through dance. Then I immediately got all my weed and my ecstasy that I had hidden in my home thrown away. Because Vandenbergen always told me that I could use no drugs. Then I went back under the influence of music on the radio. Psycho-effective start dancing. Then I started flipping channels on TV to see if there was nothing to see on TV because of precisely what happened. Perhaps this stunt was part of a much larger project. I thought everything was filmed and would be broadcast. I was constantly wondering who all could see me now. Only the people in the studio? Or maybe everyone in Belgium? Maybe even all over the world? While channel surfing I found the live broadcasts of Peter the Highland Show. I saw the presenter, Peter Hoogland, who suddenly looked right at me and then put up his hand greeting. I felt intimidated by his presence. I have done win my TV station. For all live programs, I felt that they were aware of everything. It was like I played the lead in a live show that just ended was extremely negative. Probably was the Peter Highland Show, which together with Sophie Vandenbergen footage of my private around the world sent. I felt insecure. Enormously uncertain. When I looked back KA2 presenter was back working on his show, if nothing ever happened. Yet I could still very well remember what exactly had happened. A moment before he looked straight at me as if he could see me sitting in my seat. It was clearly linked to my ex there in the studio of radio and was. Then I went over with some friends. When they saw me they immediately that something was happening. My eyes looked like I had a whole week had ceased speed. All right. Someone asked me. Not really, I replied. I saw my custom look. I think they knew only too well what was happening. Have you not noticed a new candid camera project in the media? No. My ex was on the radio. I have not heard. From now on, I began to get difficult. Maybe my friends all night watching TV1 and had missed the show on KA2. But perhaps the show lasted just top radio stage further and they were playing. Only I did not think she could. Such a thing seemed impossible. But now thou art fair. Sure. My friends went, as I believe consciously hypocritical behavior. The behavior of my friends was clearly part of the show. Again, the show seemed more important than my personal life. I would just have to settle with my ex-girlfriend himself. I thought itself. I noticed quickly that there was no one to my message had crazy ideas about ex-lovers who sing songs on the radio. Sentence in a joint? Asked someone. No, not really. I replied. At that time I had no need for weed. Moments later, I was more calm. Again I had the whole situation again, what can be forgotten. Then I again returned home. The next day I wanted to call my ex. I went to a payphone and called the number of my ex. Instead of honestly telling me everything, she played scene. She talked to me like nothing had happened. I'm not on the radio. See them. Then she suddenly had all reasons why they wanted to see me anymore. All reasons that did not matter. Suddenly she found that I apparently had too little respect for her. She was just looking for an excuse to not having to talk to me. She was clearly on the appointment with her friends from Radio Plus. In a way it was like I had never known. Then I thought that Sophie was going to tell me everything when she saw me in reality. So I decided just to melt to ride with my black Malagudi scooter. Dunno yet how she opened the door. Hello David. Sophie Day. She seemed to hide behind the door. What are you doing here, do you still on the phone? Said that you do not want to see. She wanted so clearly did not talk to me, she wanted from me as fast as possible off. I need something, just ask, it's really important. But it did not seem to bother. She knew what she wanted to say. She told me that I could no longer see her father and she wanted me rap lost. Wish her then pick K wanted to make everything right. Her saying that forever for her would cause. I wanted my life does not go messing up by using drugs. But when I wanted to grab her she jumped rap a step back a moment and I no longer knew what I wanted to do. Go away, I know you do not, what do you want from me? I was ashamed and realized again what a difficult situation I was. Then her father came to the door. He seemed to know me before. Val Sophie yet again not difficult boy. They want no more. Go away or I'll call the police. I realized that they were not clear to me saying what had happened the night before and then decided to leave. I really did not know what to think. I think she was so worn by guests of Radio Plus. I could clearly see her that she was justified to keep silent about the whole situation. When I returned to the evening show Peter Hoogland looked there was a piece of text in the intro that went as follows, the young god who descends the stairs of madness. For me, this was so clear about the situation the night before. It struck me that I was perhaps the chief god was young. Maybe it was there in the intro that I do have filmed the steps of madness. That does not sound so good, I thought to myself. The Peter Hoogland show was a show where listeners called to express their opinion on certain issues. I think the intention was that I was going to call. Then I had to tell you about the incident with Radio Plus. But because the people in my environment not honestly wanted to talk with me about what had happened, I decided not to call. Because I was under enormous pressure and not knowing whether I was going to live to cope with my imagined problem when I talked to almost 100% sure seemed to know that everything was going to be denied. It was as if everyone was aware of the show, but they did not talk about it. They adopted this new form of crime are all just fine. It was as if people recognize me anymore. It was like I had never known. As if she had forgotten that we used to have had a life together. Suddenly there was the Peter Hoogland show in the media, which I heard voices in my head. Maybe the show lasted just continue on the media and was waiting to talk about the incident until I had taken the initiative to take contact. At one point I had with my family decided that it would be that I would return home to live for a while. I was rather neutral on that idea when I get the keys from my landlord said he was giving back, the new tenant is just above. Then I heard the voice of my ex who was laughing. I think she was so present in person. Only it seemed impossible for me to ask for me to imagine the new tenant. Because it was clear that this entire scenario was part of a show, I decided not to talk about. Later my psychosis, but a good start. 4K at night to sleep I heard sound from loudspeakers. The sound came from the corner of the room and was certainly present with a certain volume. It was a show MVR between Vandenbergen and a second voice. I spoke aloud to vote against me, so just because they understood. It was hard to understand what was said. The words were distorted. Well, I could clearly hear her voice. I heard her laugh. They were clearly doing a show. Just like there was a show with listeners. She was pleasant. Only I understood nothing of what was said. The days after I heard her voice, Sophie, still in my head. She said things like let out, come to us, and so many other things. All things that to me seemed quite prophetic. It was very difficult for me. I thought I was going crazy. I knew it all means something to the incident had to do with Radio Plus. I thought I was a victim of a new kind of crime. It was as if the people are all aware that breach of privacy occurred, but everyone was trying to conceal anything. When I thought about the voices in my head, I could only conclude that Sophie still loved me. If we had contact with each other in reality, she seemed always very conscious to keep a distance. Suddenly it was Valentine. On Valentine's Day then I even called my ex-girlfriend Marjolaine. She told me that her parents were not home and asked me to join her. I was almost immediately departed. When I came it was already dark. Marjoram was about to watch TV. She was happy to see me. She had no idea what is going on. Tea was done. Wish KT not tell her all. All right, K stayed with her and what we started to talk. 'Twas just been made between us, I used too many drugs and Ga dragged me arrogant, but now thought K but that T was to come good again. T before long we were in bed together. During sex, however, the voices started talking to me, something like, David, you would not rather be in bed with me. It was clear to me that Sophie was filming. After sex, my ex-girlfriend of the radio all the time shouting at me. Like, David, you will now continue if I do not want to marry you. So I left. I got off the bed and said Kay wanted to go home. The response was Kay should know. Marjolaine began to weep. Yet I said something like that Kay wanted to sleep at home or something. If I still do everything they could agree on, Kay I would clearly not be disturbed by my second reality. One day, I sense a joint, it was there for quite a while since I had smothered. After some doubt, I decided to go to Holland. I rode my scooter to TSAS Van Gent, where as usual I went to get my weed. I knew there a shop with really good weed when I came to the address, everything seemed like it always was. No one seemed aware of what's in Belgium tea happening. I bought me a tenner, then about what was about $5 and went back to Belgium. When I got home, I rolled my first joint alone. My first puffs tasted incredibly good. 'Twas a few weeks ago that I had giblowed. After I almost began to be stoned, I realized that those voices were give me no rest. Suddenly those voices again were continuously present and they seemed twice as loud. That ruined tea effect anyway. I felt it stoned, but yet it was not the same. It was the first time that this happened. I was so afraid that the voices were equally strong stay, but fortunately everything was moving quickly. Then I decided what to watch TV. When the host of MTV's screen appeared she seemed funny to think I was stoned. It was something completely new for me. I was actually a little embarrassed. It was a pretty girl and I wanted her to know. Even though I saw myself as the new presenter of MTV. Because I heard voices at some point I let the doctor. Something I might be better not done before. I tried to tell him that my ex-girlfriend had been on the radio, and then I'm starting to hear voices. Used you a lot of drugs? No, I quit. Drugs can cause. He said I had to take medication and that everything would pass. But when I took medication just had this backwards in effect and I am even more by starting to save. I heard continuous cast. When I use the people against me were talking I could not hear them because I was trapped in my own reality. K ran almost around the Dampert. A few weeks before I went to the school, suddenly I against Thomas, a DJ from Bruges who share this with me at school. He always bought used speed to me. He told me that the price of coke was dropped to 1,400 Fr an ounce. I found it absurd. It was a degoutant idea to know that this is all linked to the way Peter Hoogland show. Clearly there was a connection with Peter Hoogland show and the emergence of a new mafia. I knew this situation between me and my friends went out to assist. I witnessed the emergence of a new Nazi movement. The last time K who heard voices lagged K already in my bed. It was Sunday evening and again I am listening to those voices which I believe came from loudspeakers. Now there was a voice through loudspeakers that he said that K LaRocca had to go. My ex, love of the incident with radio and went there too. So I jumped from my bed and quickly pulled my clothes on. It was already late. I continued home and am starting a little further lifts to La Roca. It was not long before someone was stopped without any problems for KM Nu in Antwerp. I wondered whether all these coincidences had nothing to do with Peter, Highland show in the media. Probably, though no one was talking about. After that I found someone who could bring me to La Roca. There was so obvious and many people in La Roca I noticed how I was psychotic. Again, I had delusions and so on. Then we drove to the Carrot. Just before we went in had still a little speed but was caught. K is very psychotic. In the Carrot was flipped. But I am not Sophie Vandenbergen encountered. When I awoke the next day there were 2 paramedics at my door. My family had called the doctor and said that I heard voices and did not know what I did. First I wanted to go but not the ambulance took me against my still included. Then the paramedics put me on psychiatry in Zelzate. The nurse was waiting for me and guided me further inside. When I was led into further I saw a few patients that I would stay on the ward. I wondered what I had shared with psychiatric patients. I was not sick. There was just tremendous invasion of privacy that no one wanted to talk to me about. Then they took me straight to the isolation cell. Here I was not a victim. I myself was a dangerous criminal, a psychopath. I could not remember what I said. Heard things were not there. I was trapped. In the solitary came T means that K is the situation considered as hostile. Then I become aggressive. Normally I'm yet never aggressive. Immediately when I came there were those nurses who have tied me. A little later they came to give me a few injections. Whatever I tried to say or do, nothing could help me. Somehow I had hoped it would all stop if it ever would be excessive. That there were people who could honestly say what they knew. Certainly now. But still the story was that the media had linked to my life was more important than my own life. When I first woke up I was tied up in my underwear. My nose itched, and I was claustrophobic on T. I tried to move but it did not really. All that fighting stopped suddenly. Then I was just crazy, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. How can they do to a man thing? I heard a noise at the door. The doctor comes along with 2 nurses inside. They have sandwiches and coffee included. Mex okay, we're going to release here. So what can you eat? You promise to stay calm. Are these people crazy? Since when am I such a threat to my fellow man? Yes, I am calm, I am always calm. The doctor and his nurse exchanged quick glances. It will certainly have to. Do you want something to eat? Actually need for a good explanation. Without saying anything, I start to eat. Okay, you may go back to sleep, we will give you an injection and back tie. I cannot go. Sorry, that's still too risky. So I'm asleep for 3 days. I found it very unfair. When I first time walked on the ward I was broken. For the first time in days I again had clothes on my body. The nurse gave me a cigarette and left me alone. I saw that there was a garden so I went there. Around the garden there was a fence. All the time there was the voice of my ex in my head that kept repeating the same annoying things. A little later I got my room. The nurse told me that the patient in front of me in the room was a few days earlier had committed suicide. I have my doubts as this morbid fact. Later that night when I looked around the department I understood what they meant with mixed problems. It was the department to transform into a forensic department which also interned many detainees were present. When I thought I was here to stay, I felt a victim of the system. What makes me the worst paranoia was that I certainly know that people thought my illness artificially held up by telepathy. The people seemed to know this but there was nobody who wanted to talk about it. The first time was needed therapy KK in my department in a small warm room to participate in silly activities. Refused to undergo this humiliation was tantamount to solitary confinement in solitary confinement. K was crazy. They made sure that my whole story in itself would question. When I first talked with the doctor, I tried to explain to him what had happened. I told him about Sophie who was on the radio, etc. He said that this is all imagination and was part of the clinical picture of a paranoid schizophrenic. From then I realized all too well what kind of difficult situation I was. Apparently there are here in Belgium fascist procedures that people who talk about invasion of privacy systematically disappear in psychiatry. I was then very heavy medication. I was given antipsychotic agents for you very tired. Plus an additional sedatives. Because I was completely dazed from the medication, I decided to ask my psychiatrist to build. Only he found it far too early. The main part of my program consisted of a joint work and sheltered workshop attached to the institution. Patients from all divisions were their joint work. When I first arrived I was sick. I saw mostly older people, most chronically ill. I could not really imagine myself there all day, band proceeded to do. Perhaps for the rest of my life. Have there still as much as possible to spend time trying positive. Certainly not much work and drink coffee. I had severe paranoia, Sophie VM. So I called her again. She said she was walking her dog. The idea that she was not in radio and I found very reassuring. She told me that they went to study journalism. I went with someone from the nursing staff in a separate sitting room. But now tell me what happened. I began to talk about what I experienced. My ex was on the radio. After everyone had denied this. Then I start hearing voices. And how do you think about it now? Replied the nurse. Normal. Then we sit some more talking. After everything to tell, the nurse said, you know that it is not, for you is that what really happened, but you have to accept that everything is illusion. What then did happen? You have an error in your brains. How you mean? In your brains there is too much dopamine, therefore hast thou hallucinations. I could not really accept that she started talking about a disease. These people wanted me to no longer believed in the invasion of privacy. As an alternative they offered me the dopamine theory. But I still did everything. With my ex-girlfriend who had been on the radio, and with that little speaker in my room. At one point I was visited by my family. They were worried and wanted to see me again. It was a great time since we had seen each other. Sentence for all of my recording. How's it going? Someone asked. Not so good, I replied. And what the doctor says? Now I had to take a deep breath. It was still hard for me to talk about. I still was clear what had happened. He says I'm sick and must take medication. You must stay here long. I myself do not know. One night everyone was already sleeping and I was only to TV watching them. Again I saw that Peter Hoogland show still aired. When Peter Hoogland on screen appeared, he looked straight at me. I decided my TV off and go to sleep. I did not want contact with Peter Hoogland. I was against invasion of privacy. I asked myself the question whether other patients are at the Peter Hoogland. As I just watched show with JP was talking, I asked him if he believed in the existence of telepathy. He began flipping heavy. Telepathy, talk to me like it. In his response, I noticed that he did not want to talk about. He became severely paranoid when I uttered the word only. Apparently he had also thought about in the past, but he had only delivered more paranoia. So again I considered nursing as a fascist. Like anyone who denies that telepathy is at the root of schizophrenia. I recognized myself in JP. I realized that maybe I had the same disease. I liked it. I hoped I never would be. After a month I had decided to recurrence and the justice of the peace that I have a 6-month extension needed. Are there really still become completely self-absorbed? Confined alone to those voices in my head. Only paranoia still remained. The medication I was not feeling well. I could no longer meet in psychiatry. So I decided to walk away. I sat on a locked ward, so this was not so simple. Was there for a while to think about how I could get away until suddenly some wacko said there is already someone along the roof in the garden, could escape was by some tables and chairs stacking. Just when I had everything put together the nurses saw me. So I rushed my wrap and I wrap on the roof and crawled up running as I was still haunted by the nursing, but then I lost them. Walked in Ghent where KK huge psychotic around. I just walked on and felt myself slipping into a world where thoughts and delusions seem to be just the same. It haunted him, so things around in my head like, what can K do now, who in the past can help me, why are these voices speak to me? The show with my powerlessness and disease awareness, a dangerous combination. I sit down here and look around. Passing through as a couple mensen. I look at them. They look at Mitch. And they knew me from the media, maybe not. After I had not slept and looked like I had seized a weak speed, I wanted to go Sophie and her re-explanation. She was still one that all began with her association of Radio Plus. It was asked if I was standing at the door, about 8 o'clock. Sophie was still at home and went to school, just leave. She was just in the shower, her mother said. She said I could go up to her, but I said no. I do not know what it was when I was with her mother had said I left. I've put a bit further and wait for Sophie. She has taken me to go to the city. We talked a bit and so again I was convinced that she had nothing more to do with it. Later that evening I found myself again somewhere in Ghent. I was looking for a place to sleep, what further leg came me down on the ground. I hear synthesis or music sent by Radio Plus play, but I think, however, that S not on the street but comes out of my head. Then I had hallucinations. Suddenly I had a lot of headaches. I felt very bad. Then I'm called to my family. K could finally sleep. Back in psychiatry I had to solitary confinement, without being tethered to lie this time. Do K when many slept. When I walked in the garden I suddenly heard music from the 60s in my head. Despite the fact that I took a lot of medication if I had hallucinations. I once had to call my friend. I knew her from my youth. We had a relationship. When during the weekend at my house I told her I was already several months heard voices. I thought that for her it must seem totally incomprehensible, but suddenly she said, I hear voices. Is that long? I replied. No. What voices you hear it? A boy and a girl. I did not quite know what to say. Maybe it was my ex with someone else there. The doctors are wrong, no dopamine. Yes, you're right. It's telepathy. Yes, I think you are right. But even though we were both willing to search for our own statement, yet we remained powerless against this elusive situation. One day Michelle said to me, you should talk less about your problems. Yes, perhaps. I replied. The people you will never not agree. When I remembered how people had responded so far I could give him just the same. Yet I could for myself hard to accept that truth is the truth no longer. Yes, but I want a process. As long as you keep your quest for the truth not forsake, you shall be stuck here. I understand what you mean. My cousin came geared at some point to visit me with some friends. It was the first time after my withdrawal I saw him again. We were just talking and suddenly I said to him, I cannot trust anybody, everyone is a hypocrite. Then he said, I can trust you, David. And then like, I am your cousin, David, was there anything then Zook certainly tell you? This I would have believed it, but I could not trust my cousin. My psychiatrist decided after 5 months I was ready for dismissal. Provided that I came in outpatient treatment and would find something to fill my days. It was huge to realize that ultimately still end was coming to my recording. The early days of psychiatry was all completely in the same atmosphere. My psychosis was still not disappeared. Still, there were so-called delusions about telepathy, about invasion of privacy. Thus, I occasionally have the need to talk about what I experienced. All this was at least not well received by my family or friends. She always told me that everything is illusion and that I had forgotten everything. I almost thought myself then that it was better if I was going to try and forget. Maybe the problems were or naturally go away. Still there was the Peter Hoogland show on TV. But I resolved to myself not to look anymore. I think it was still the intention that I would call the show and then talk about my illness. Even though everyone advised me, yet I tried to call soon to Sophie. I wanted to agree with her. But she said things schizophrenic. She told me that I had never liked him. I never have had any respect for her. Sure, I looked like her, still. Maybe she was just that I told her once or so. But I could not just start over. Then they just kept on talking. It must first be well with you, and again I did not know what to say. Occasionally wanted so start talking about the whole situation, but it was too confrontational for myself. I knew that Sophie was still denying everything. Eventually she told me that she studied for a journalist. Because she wanted to work for VTM. Because I did not immediately wanted to work, I decided to go to school. I had several thoughts regarding paranoia the school. Did the people at school know me through the media? Did everything is well? I went all the way no drug use. Furthermore, I hoped that everything went well. In my class there was someone who sold pills for little money. He could get some pills for very little money. It was itself only a half years ago before I sold them pills. I then paid much more. That overall price was tremendously reduced. I think this had everything to do with the Peter Hoogland show. Since I had internet, I was determined to find more information about schizophrenia and telepathy. That way I hoped that I could ever prove what I was saying because of my illness. I then also my own personal story published on the internet because I felt that my story can demonstrate that schizophrenia is an artificial disease. On TV there was a new show on KA2. Big Brother. A show based on violation of privacy. It is therefore my opinion that for voyeurism is chosen. Voyeurism sell through mass media seems to me, however, not fully morally responsible. Whenever I'm on the bus or tram set I heard voices in the noise around me. I always thought that everyone could hear me. But there was the question again, is it real or not? Could anyone else hear this? Until there was once a friend of mine said he had heard it all. We took the bus together and on the bus there was a girl's voice seemed to come from nowhere and all the time against me had been talking to other people could also hear. But they did not just talk about it. Fusey could clearly talk about it. He said he also heard the voices. T could have been my chance for the first time with someone about my problems to speak. We then have a moment to talk, but there is not much to say further. After much insistence, I still agree a date can decorate with Sophie. She was not angry for that stalking, she found just that we're like two normal people could have contact. We had agreed on neutral ground somewhere. A cafe in the plaza shopping. When I rugsag her I thought she looked very handsome. We were just talking. It just went about our lives in general. What do you remember all these days? I asked her. I am a photographer. She replied. She had clearly decided to do something with the media. As far as I could remember them well when we had a relationship still had no idea what they wanted to do professionally. Apparently they chose to do something to serve with the media. First, studying journalism and then went to work for the media. She had clearly decided to do something with the media. As far as I could remember them well when we had a relationship still had no idea what they wanted to do professionally. Apparently they chose to do something to serve with the media. First, studying journalism and then went to work for the media. I found it very negative for our continued relationship in the future. Have you a sweet? I asked her. Not yet. It has now been a while since I've had a sweet. I was pleasantly surprised. Apparently she still remember me. Maybe she wanted to wait to get her under the right circumstances would require restarting a relationship with her. Why not? I asked. She started laughing. I currently do not need love, she told me. I knew that it clearly had to do with what happened between us was. After a little further talk she said she still had other commitments and she left. After a few months sat even in the pub with my cousin and some friends. We were on tea terrace and it was a relaxed atmosphere. Suddenly someone brings up a joint. I had so long no longer used but when my cousin went to that joint and explained to me that he drowned, I have taken a few features. Such a trip. These votes were then enormous. K was back on myself tripping and no one could reach me. K heard voices in my head shouting no and then began the "Why do you do that?" They showed at me on their way to finish it. K was enormously upsetting that weed, and then there were still those voices in my head. K began tripping. From those few features demanded my psychosis me again fully. I saw people looking at me and talking. It's all I could hear were the voices in my head. What the people around me were saying I could not understand a word again because I had enormous difficulty concentrating. I gradually fell away completely in my second reality. "Have you forgotten what happened to you?" I heard her voice say Sophie had. Meanwhile I saw worried faces looking. I really could not say more. Did that K is a huge tense atmosphere hung. I mean K was always silent, but now you could see that there is something very wrong. Yet no one asked me anything. Then I thus begin throttling back. Tea was not long before I choked back daily and extravagant. I could no longer find intoxication as before, those voices upset everything. Problem as K nipped head was that K suffered greatly from voting. When I smoked joints back I decided to take another couple of friends to visit where I came much earlier. I was there for a long time not been because I had had a psychosis. When I called again to speak my friends were glad to hear me. "Come and see," they said on the phone. When I came there were all my friends at Quickle Blunts to smoke. Life in Asanid was clear, little has changed. When they saw me, their response was clear, "Ost, thou art much thickened." Yes, I know, I had noticed already. Meanwhile, I weighed about 80 pounds. My family always tried to deny it because it is a consequence of the medication, but it must be clearly have been visible. "You have used drugs." "Very little, I must take medication today. I had a recording," and so on. "I know, I've heard." At one point I was lying in my bed and I was hallucinating. I heard Sophie Vandenbergen say, "David, I must speak to you." Peter Hoogland had her somewhere private and went into her pussy fucked while I was out listening. Whether that was in every way that I believed what they wanted. Kay heard on the tone of her voice that she did have sex. When she started to fuck I was crazy. Sophie said so very clearly, "Oh, David, I'm on you." I was angry, but nothing worked against these unwanted sexual feelings. There were already serious things happened, but I never thought anything would ever happen. Still I loved her. It was like my worst nightmare had become reality correctly. I decided to wander around the house. It was the beginning of a new period where I was confronted almost daily with similar situations. Since then I can every moment of the day hallucinating that a girl get raped. She should then moaning as she is raped. For me it is quite impossible to talk with the people. They do all that by not going well, but I refuse to tell them what is happening in my head. One evening it seemed to start again, so I called to Sophie. To see where she was and what she's doing. I had to know. This time she went, I do not deny. First she tried on and they normally do. When I started shouting, "You must be honest, I gotta know, what's going on?" Happen. And then the tone in her voice started to change. It looked again as if I had it right, K didn't just be sure. When I noticed that something was wrong I went to there. It was already dark outside. She opened her window open in her night clothes. "I need to talk," I said. It was a huge relief to know that they just got home. I was hoping she would talk to me. "David, leave me alone. It is important. I cannot help you. I might think again about this situation was going to be. Why did they not talk to me? Come down here, then we'll talk about it. Leave me alone, I'll call the police." Apparently she would not listen and called the police. Now she had still not been honest about the causes of my psychosis. I decided to head home to start walking. It was still a huge distance for me back home. Meanwhile, I again had auditory hallucinations. This was a situation that is not normal. I started with automutilating. It was my only way out. I took a break knife and started cutting myself. For me it was clear, I did not want to live anymore and I went to commit suicide. I heard voices shouting Neen, and another voice you dare not. Self-K could distance themselves from those voices and seemed K unperturbed continue. I finally seemed to oppose forced my thoughts and feelings. But I was not dead. I had still survived. At one point I was at home geared and I started talking about what I've had all experienced lately. I was still convinced of my personal ideas and had a need to talk. My cousin had of course long been an answer ready. What are you now achieve by constantly talking about your hallucinations? I still want a trial for breach of privacy. Forget it, there will never be a process. There is absolutely nothing happened. For me it is still clearly different from what I heard. Therefore I will never forget what happened. And I will always keep talking about a process. Automutility was for me the only solution to escape the second reality that haunted me for a while. So it happened more often that I started cutting myself. Some friends had noticed that I had cut myself with a cutter. In a way I could no longer deny that I am currently in a crisis period was. They found clear I was not normal. Why do you do that? I do not know. You will all get scars. It is you still have your whole life chasing. But it all seemed not to penetrate. I thought I was correct. The people were still deliberately deny the truth. There was never no solution other than suicide. At one point I heard a song that I thought again was a breach of public law. IVM with Radio Plus. The aforementioned two people kissed me. When I phoned to Sophie was her father who answered the phone. I want to talk with Sophie. Why? Because they are on the radio and therefore responsible for my illness. You're sick boy, you must go to a psychiatrist. My size is still used XTC. One day he told me he still had a couple of XTCs are at home. At first I was in doubt, then I decided to make yet another one more. We then went together to the Overport. We sat in what decadence cocktails to drink at the bar. It was not long before my ecstasy started to work. At one point a girl out what is in my neighborhood come and stand. She asked me if I had taken ecstasy. I told her no. But they apparently did not believe me. They then continue and then I saw her some pills sold. Then she is all the time in my neighborhood hang around. At the end of the evening they again went along to my house. I decided to put on some music and to roll a joint. But they apparently had no sense in a joint. She had sex drive. Then we have it done once. And again and again. Therefore it was a positive experience to come back to take ecstasy. Because everything that happens is the last time so enormously confusing, would like to know how incredibly Sophie thinks about all this. Will they deny everything like they always did, or not? So I call again, but unfortunately I cannot see her speak. She is only going to live. When my family first saw that I had to self-mutilation who did were very shocked. They knew it for a while did not go well. I told them that I had done when I had a psychosis. They could absolutely not sympathize and wanted me back in the recording went. Because I do not want me, they have decided to recall a siren. I did not. A new recording I saw absolutely not sit. I had a lot of negative memories of a previous recording. I thought about it again just to try to hide. But then finally I decided to just home to wait for the cops. The police then showed me to my house and arrested me to a doctor in the US hospital. There, a doctor just a short conversation with me. Which decided that I had a psychosis. Then there is a short contact been with the public prosecutor and one has brought me to St. Camillus. Since I first had required several days in a closed ward stay. There were just annoying people. None of my age. I wondered what would happen now. The doctors tried to say that I had borderline disorders. I was again obliged to take Risperdal. Then I was allowed to Castile 2, a division I programmed to follow for my drug problem. All I found myself that my drug use was not problematic. Castle 2 was a ward for people with drug problems are included. I had previously also had another shot. So I knew some of the nurses' AL therapy was still not too bad. A little sports, a bit OT. All pleasant things to be doing. It seemed that this recording would be okay. After a few days at Castle 2 Sat was a new girl arrived. She called Mary. Mary was pretty girl and she was like me, addicted to drugs. They just seemed more aware of her drug problem than me. As we sat together in the grass things to say to each other, I felt a lot better. At one point we started kissing. The long-awaited moment had finally arrived. I almost forgot all my psychosis. We tried as much as possible to avoid the group, and doing something together. Only the group have not responded so positively to. Therefore it seemed to not to go well in the group. Fortunately, this recording was not so long. My psychiatrist decided that there was no reason to prolong my stay even longer. After 40 days I was allowed to return home. At one point Andy was little coke to my home to the Chinese. Suddenly we heard a sound from loudspeakers in the corner of the room. A voice was saying those things. For me it was clear that the time had no voices in my head that I could only perceive but also by small loudspeakers that Andy could be heard. So I decided to talk to him about it. Have you heard that sound? I asked. Yes, of course. Replied Andy. We clearly had both heard the same. Andy did not deny it. The sound came from the corner of the room. From now on, I had a clear psychosis. All the memories of what had happened came flooding back. Andy, I tried to explain what had happened several years ago. After that little, Andy started talking about his psychosis. With him were clearly other things. Through a occultistic site I was on another site which arrived. They talked about artificial telepathy. The research is based on the Frey effect and is about transmission of spoken words. Using pulsed electromagnetic signals can sound an audible click. I think it was clear that this artificial telepathy a possible cause of my schizophrenia. So this was what I believe was used by me for me to create an artificial disease. Then I started my own site which I combined this information with my personal story. Everyone I meet on the street is now talking to voices in his head. If I walk down the street I see that almost everyone is schizophrenic. The people clearly hear all voices. Probably my schizophrenia is a new stage. Supposedly everything will be imagination, but I myself know it not. Apparently the reaction of the people depending on what the voices in their heads all tell. If I'm waiting for the bus or tram starts sometimes spontaneously someone to laugh. That is when confronted with a positive second reality. It even happened that people spontaneously start to cry. Like yesterday when I was waiting for the tram. What I do not normally find. It is quite clear that almost all people I meet face a second reality. Apparently, my illness is changing. When I to Rucksack, Lucy told me that she also heard voices. At one point I was totally going crazy. That telepathy seemed omnipresent in my life. So I decided that I needed to start research into the existence of telepathy. A philosophical treatise would have to prove anything. By indirect arguments I would try to find out the truth. After much thinking I had found a test. By itself to wink I could let the people on TV winking. This I could prove that telepathy was integrated into my life. Furthermore, people I could to say. I also start thinking about my free, an association study. If we want to do free association, we take a sentence and make a new sentence with many words and syllables which is always the same emphasis. This is mainly applicable to art, especially music. By means of which one music a certain message is trying to convey regarding telepathy and schizophrenia. This free, association method, we can regard as a personal tool to create new, to find hidden messages in music. The music goes mainly about telepathy and schizophrenia. I think it is since 1999 on my paranoid schizophrenia. I also have my own theory developed IVM my place in the collective consciousness. It's about that very many people consciously or unconsciously with my real face. I think it is especially clear when you look at the presenters on TV. Morgan you should call, the announcers told me always with subtle body language. A new acquaintance of mine was an artist. In his living room hung some homemade artwork. On one of these works was clear as if I was pictured with a friend. Clearly two guys with long hair who sit somewhere to smother. When I asked, Arnaud said that the drawing he had made during the lesson. I myself was convinced that my size was depicted in the painting. My own face had changed a bit, but I could clearly recognize my size. Where does that painting? It comes from the lesson. Just as if I myself am that there is depicted. Then I did not need to talk. I was again convinced of my personal truth. It was another situation where the people aware to deny the truth. Just like in the beginning of my psychosis. I thought it was a drawing when I was recording my Zelzate again at jury quick Alba allergen joints had started smoking. Maybe when I was on TV. Just as I thought all the time. When I saw video footage of Osama talked about the prophet of the Western man, I realized it was me. Nowhere was there a prophet. I think I had in the media talk about invasion of privacy with my ex-girlfriend. If the Europeans a new prophet, they have to show him in the media. I asked myself the question, what would happen? Al-Qaeda wanted to clear that I talked to the media about invasion of privacy. But what would happen after that? When I at one time at my mate Arnaud was at home, I decided to give him the URL of free live sex scams. We were there together to watching and the sound was on. The hooker started to moan. When my turn allowed, the joke began to moan. She started at the same pace as me moaning. My size could do nothing but just watch how I feel on such an incredible way had a relationship with a Dutch hooker. This was clearly the sign that I also live in the Netherlands on the M radio. Or maybe I'm there to see it on TV. Either I was present at that hooker like a voice in her head. Actually, I've always been looking for people that my ideas about telepathy and schizophrenia could follow. At one point I even began collecting signatures because I thought I was in such a way everything was going to solve. Most people were pretty positive and wanted to contribute to my project. But eventually I stopped there because I thought there was never any concrete changes were coming. One day I was just home alone. As always, I was again on joints tea smoke. I was a bit on tea when I was zapping Nina Deman program, saw her on TV. My sound was still there and played music from my stereo. Suddenly I saw her looking at me and say clearly by subtle body language, "Hello David." I could even see her say in reality was just not my sound. I even dared me not to move. When I looked at her again, I saw her again to say something. I saw her clearly still look at me. She was expecting a clear response expected of me. It was like my sound went on NTV from my living room, a conversation with Nina Deman. It was like she was talking to me about the incident with my ex on radio, and while the whole of Flanders could listen. Then I'm still looking at her show. Suddenly she said through subtle body language like, "You must solve your own problems. And we cannot help you." Then the sound turned on and was it over again. At one point I thought I had to talk in the media about my problems. Only after I'd ask for a committee of inquiry that investigates violations of privacy would ever be able to talk about the causes of schizophrenia. Through subtle body language on TV they always said, "Tomorrow you must call." I really did not know what I should believe. Just like they did tell me everything if I went contact us with the media. I wanted to settle with the people in my area. At one time I was there with Tom. He listened to classical music. It was as if this music was made in real time. Then after that I go home to find that post with classical music. Then I was at my house listening to a show with telepathy. At one point, during a brief admission to Gui's Lane, I had met someone with whom I had been talking about God and the Bible and the existence of telepathy. Then told him about the radio show that I thought to have heard from my neighbor where I live also was heard. Despite most people seemed, he did not immediately say that I was psychotic and that it was all imagination. He seemed to understand me, and when we talk a bit further, I asked him if he had noticed something of themselves sometimes. It was clearly a difficult question, but nevertheless he was willing to talk about the existence of a show on the radio. He could not say much about himself. I myself seemed to me that Aaron is aware of what he thought T was talking about. Just before that we had together to watch TV, and I explained to him my personal research IMV telepathy. He could only agree with me. Before Guis Lane had slept in the K at first listened to classical music. I was just sleeping in my bed and heard an ex-girlfriend saying come ost, we will any times. The poor girl probably thought that I really wanted sex in a way. Actually, I could easily imagine what is happening. Such marginally from Ghent was talking to my ex-girlfriend. Maybe he said things to her as you go tell him the truth? Or who looks like you, me, or Ost. Maybe she had to prove that they never did say to me or her finger in her ass stabbing. Otherwise the vote is not out of her head. Of course, everything is just imagination. If I ever start talking again I'll be paranoid. After 10 days under observation in Guis Lane had sat, everything went well with me. I used my medication on a regular basis and had decided to nip joints less. We managed well. But after a Sunday night again had been discussion with my family it was still just wrong. I again had some things said that it could not. The evening was when my neighbor came beer to drink. Just before I went to bed, around 12 p.m., there were 2 cops at my door. They asked me to come with them. What I did not want. When they noticed I could not just go with them they decided to handcuff me to do, and I just take it to S office. Once in S office, I had arrived at the hole where I had to spend the night. I could not laugh. Eventually nothing happened. My mother had the crazy situation greatly exaggerated and that cops would not even listen to my story. While I was in the hole trying to stay awake so I heard a radio show whose existence I have guessed but could never prove it. I heard people yell at each other. Occasionally there was music above the sound of crying people came. Then I heard applause. Then I heard people crying again. It was like a girl I knew from earlier was involved. I heard her call, but could understand her cane. Then some police sirens. Then it was quiet again. It was flipped. This was clearly the band radio show where my neighbor always listened. This was obviously the sequel to Peter Hoogland show. Apparently there was a program on the radio. From when I compare myself with Harry Truman. From the Truman Show with Jim Carrey. Then at night I looked always to Big Brother special shows on television. As shown on France 3 and later. Then you see moving images with hidden telepathic messages. At such a way, people with telepathy or talk to one another through the images on TV to give a show or something. For the rest, I just look at my dealer to get some weed and I was always home alone to smother. I found the ideal self in a way to live. I had no need for the company of my friends my hypocritical. If I still consider going somewhere, I tried the people there as always make sure that my ex had been on the radio and that telepathy is the cause of schizophrenia. Most people consciously deny everything. That I noticed. Yet I found it essential to discuss this with my friends. But despite everything, it was suddenly too much for home again. They have brought me to a psychiatrist and so I again gallicired. According to the doctor I was sick. There was no telepathy. The doctor said this time that I dual diagnosis did. I tried to tell him about invasion of privacy, but he refused to believe such a thing. All these ideas heard at home in the clinical picture of a paranoid schizophrenic. First I then spent a few days Ven. A closed ward where there are various issues treated. It was hard against my enthusiasm that I had to sit over there. I was still almost psychotic of what happened with the cops. And I was very paranoid because I thought that I was not safe in psychiatry. Because my bag was put in tea. I was still convinced that I have an artificial disease, so I thought it was bullshit to talk about a disease that is not true and take medication without that solves the problems. Ven 1 was a dirty cunt department. I was only allowed half an hour per day outside and LVENNE3 then I have to go to a general psychosis department. There were some other people my age, which nevertheless may be important. Even though I was in psychiatry, I could not mention my ideas about telepathy and invasion of privacy. At one point I wanted to Dr. Mertens try to convince that artificial telepathy was the cause of my illness. After a deep breath I said, people commit violations of privacy by artificial telepathy. This is what happens to me. Why would anyone want to use telepathy to you? I do not know. Apparently wanted Dr. Mertens still talk about it. It is typical for the medical sector that they clearly want to keep the truth hidden. You have just a disease, you must take medication. From now on, I wanted nothing more to say to her. It did know that they can respond, so it went. It's a dirty piece of pretension. It is her job to get people to shut up because they hear voices. While she knows only too well that it is an artificial disease. Despite all my efforts, said Drive Mertens after a few weeks, you must continue for another 4 weeks, otherwise go back smoking joints and again aggressive. I myself knew only too well that it did not miss out again and assured me that they could go home, let go. Even though I still use drugs again, I did not become aggressive. Even though I have not suffered from delusions. But she wanted me remained. Probably they wanted before they let me go get control of my illness. For me it was obvious. Dr. Mertens wished the media had no invasion of privacy did more. Otherwise she would not let me go. So, I had another month to continue VENNE3. I thought it was very unjust. But still I tried as much as possible participate in the therapy and to ensure that the therapists had a good impression of me. On the papacy, I hoped that I should sit long shot. After 40 days was Drive Mertens is necessary for me for a year Colasiran. Because I often suffered from delusions, I was a real threat to my surroundings. If you're talking about telepathy and invasion of privacy, you're obviously schizophrenic and you should be locked up. I hated her. Because the dirty whore that she thinks it is all solved by me to shut up and give me pills. One thing I knew, I was never let me change. I just know what I know. I will never forget what I have experienced. Schizophrenia is a disease that artificially maintained with telepathy, all of which I believe will never change. Even if that means that I will again sometime incarcerated. In St. Camillus was someone lying on my bed. The bed smelled of perfume clear. Then said Drive Mertens I could go home after a month in his recording. She then said I could come just in abatement. Nothing of course was not true. Because I just started throttling back for my resignation was, of course I could not go home. The dirty whore was again not to the appointment. I had really done my best not to drown, but at some point what was wrong? I found that there was no reason why I should not return home. Yet it was not that way all my problems in a way that I was present a threat to my fellow man. Dr. Mertens wanted just sick power games. I was not normal for such degoutant old woman going to tell me what I was for the rest of my life to stop throttling. And what else, hey, dirty whore. Then it all changed in St. Camillus. Then it all changed in St. Camillus. The people heard voices through all my fault and did not. According to them I was the cause of their illness. Some have then decided to take me with telepathy to put in the bag and thus their own psychosis heal. I'll tell him, they say always. Then I had smoked a joint when I was home on weekends. There was all along a bit of weed hidden in an envelope to my home. Eventually I had it still smoked. But next week when I got a urinary control, I was positive. Then there is a team meeting decided that I no longer VENNE3 could stay and I had to VENNE1, the closed section. After 8 months the doctors still did not think I could return home. From then on I lived again in hell. According to me there was no reason why I should stay longer recording. But still, I was now back to a closed section. Because I had smoked the occasional joint. On Ven 1 had a girl I know who Lisa said. It was not long before we had a relationship. But then the nurse realized that we had a relationship, they said that they did not want this. And then they start becoming more and more control and it was quite impossible for us to have a relationship. Therefore, Lisa went home. Then we saw each other occasionally. Lisa did her best to as much as possible to come and visit. At a certain point I got phone from Lisa while she was crying. She went to commit suicide. We then have some time together talking and then things went better with her. A few days later it was done, because they saw no future with a guy in psychiatry whom she did not know when he finally went outside. Then the doctors found that I had a dual diagnosis Sladenge department. At first I thought this a good idea. But I still agree on an initial interview the psychologist was a cool type with whom I could talk well. So I decided to go Sladenge. In Sladenge I was specifically treated for dual diagnosis. This I sat with all people the same age and had the same problem. I found them very good. It was also less penalized if there was a mistake was committed in drugs. Erst it was seen how it was conducted in the group. Because I am paranoid schizophrenic, and just about everyone involved in my psychosis. But everything seemed to expire. I even had a new love, Marina. Together with Marina, I always started smoking joints. In Sladenge are my ideas IVM. My friends at home has changed enormously. For me it is clear. My family and friends to hear all voices. At first I thought these people wanted me to help if ever the opportunity was. But obviously nobody wants to talk about telepathy or invasion of privacy. On the contrary. When I talked with Lucas, I noticed that he was aware deny everything. Apparently he found it normal. There was no violation of privacy and such. You will commit suicide, he told me through subtle body language. However, need for him all these things also are extremely important. But he could not talk honestly about the causes of schizophrenia. After 2 months, recording, the doctor thought it was time for DAG therapy, what I liked enormously. It was extremely well along in the beginning. I was glad that I finally have my freedom largely to rugged. During my DAG therapy in Sladenge I had severe hallucinations and I'm back start car mutuals learning. During my DAG therapy in Sladenge I had severe hallucinations and I'm back start car mutuals learning. When my love, Marina, saw this she said, you must let us take you back. I of course refused. After that they all agreed to the psychiatrist and I was going to say it all, go and explain. The doctor said of course it was not good and I had to pay attention. After 4 months I finally Sladenge to sit at home. Actually I thought at the beginning of my recording all that seemed to have everything under control by the maintenance dose of medication that I took then. Especially for my resignation, I had once cut my wrists, but I was happy to keep hidden. So I incredibly lucky. Now I sat in psychiatry, I have again seen how Belgium is actually functioning. Because I say I'm filmed by the media, I am suspicious, and therefore I am sick, should I be locked up and medication? Something is not normal. Personally, I'm still very clear that the people who live broadcasts present, such as news to me watching them be. At one point I was watching on CNN. Suddenly, the image disappears and comes in an Oriental Mafia type image which is located in the garden of a large villa. CNN is not showing the real images, he says. Just like in a movie about terrorism. Only this time it was really happening. Moment I thought that maybe he was going to say something against me or anything, but that has not happened to me, was all the way on my personal paranoid schizophrenia. When I first changed my book there was a terrorist attack in Madrid. Again there was synchrony. It was the first stop here in Europe. When I finally got my site Apocalyptic Visions published on the internet came a new video of Osama where he says that Europe no longer target of Al-Qaeda. I think there was another connection between my life as a paranoid schizophrenic and certain facts from the news. Even if everything is denied, it seems that my story is very important for our culture. Before night I went to sleep, there were voices all the time talking to me. Suddenly I heard a girl say, "Leave me alone, leave me alone." I was crazy. A little later I hear someone say, "Do you want Kathleen say something?" I knew it was not the intention that I would answer. And if someone asks for something you say that nothing happened. I will say. After a moment to hallucinate I hear someone say, "Is he bothering you? He can talk to me." After a girl was raped by voices in her head she lets her rap rape again. Because I was still convinced that Sophie was involved in my psychosis, I suddenly made a remark, "I'm going to murder her." "It's also my ex-girlfriend," I heard someone say. Actually, it's just a fact that I did not know. I just hoped it was not. As I was watching a documentary on a Dutch post was about international terrorism. There was a code name for a contact persoon for international terrorism in the Netherlands, David above. Coincidentally, I also call David. Again there was synchrony. Suddenly I heard someone say, "Those voices in my head are the most important thing in my life." Apparently this person thought that such a second reality in him should not lead to a disease. Why do people do whatever the voices in their heads saying? As I heard voices, I was myself again start cutting. It happened again more and more nowadays. At one point I tried to say something. I want it quiet in my head. Or that you can now cut or not, so you will not catch me. Once after I had gone in Ghent, I heard almost every day a girl whom I had been talking the night before being raped by telepathy. Mika from Cosmic.ze should say things like "I'm a whore," or "I'm horny." Apparently some people who keep working on it for some women to give psychoses night. While I was home in my arms on the cut I heard voices. Then I cut my wrists and dropped me on the ground. At first I thought as I was going to die, but it was not long before I realized that I went again to survive. Everyone I meet on the street is now talking to voices in his head. If I walk down the street I see that almost everyone is schizophrenic. The people clearly hear all voices. Probably my schizophrenia is a new stage. Supposedly everything will be imagination, but I myself know it not. After every girl knows that she get raped by voices in her head since she was just passing by on the street, they decided to distance themselves. If I see someone walking by on the street I see them say "Yes, I'll do it," and then they usually say "I'm a whore," followed by a telepathic tug on the flute. You could almost start thinking that they really want it, the women here in Ghent. Because it is not backward, they say. Since I live so to speak, not in reality. People seem to be a second reality to have built my life around. Certain fascist ideas that exist around my person shall ensure that the people never normally be able to do. The politicians on TV are clearly all involved in the situation. Most programs IVM politics are live. The politicians on television are clearly involved in my paranoid schizophrenia. Occasionally I'll follow the seventh day. I then telepathy to say what I will. But to most questions, the government has no answer. I myself have been thinking to yourself to work on a documentary with Terzake or heads. I am temporarily to wait until I've written a first book, then I try all the way through to matters relating to discuss the incident with Radio Plus. But it's about the political world is aware but refuses to act. My psychosis is present everywhere. If I were up in the morning and I watch TV or I listen to the radio, are the presenters clearly still aware of what happens to my home? But if I go to the store, if I take the bus or tram, from my house I leave, is everywhere confronted with mass psychosis. When I heard music that I had downloaded from the internet, I heard a song that began with the voice of Sophie. It was clear her reaction to what happened at my house. ZEW is clearly shouting "Allah's but boy" in a very unfortunate way. It was a song by Zion Train. Personally, I am confronted with an absurd second reality. There are always only said things that I cannot possibly respond. My friends, their second reality, however, is much more confrontational. For them there is perfect contact telepathically. They talk to entities. A voice that speaks against them stemming from a form of consciousness in another dimension. Actually, these are people who sit at home and try by yourself channeling an influence on my paranoid schizophrenia. There are several hookers who hear voices and each week they tear their pussy little further. They clearly have a psychosis, a voice in their head against them and calls them what to do. Apparently there are some dark elements that every woman I meet to systematic rape. People who use telepathy and channeling to try to influence my paranoid schizophrenia. One evening I went to sleep for the first time. I had visual hallucinations. There were clearly some women obliged to expose themselves in their second reality. When the visual hallucinations I first started, almost immediately I saw a familiar face. It was a girl I knew from when they socialize. The day after it was flipped. The tram driver had visual hallucinations. It was clear when he drove up with his tram. It was like he had not slept for a week of speed. On TV there was a tennis player who had fainted. I think when she had visual hallucinations. At one point, Mika from the Cosmic raped by 10 Turks. All were to shout "You're a whore. And you cannot talk to him." That's why I finally allowing women so strange moaning. After a few people for a long time facing all women in their second reality, they are really capable of real conversations to keep. If you look closely at TV you can even see the effect immediately with the presenters. I therefore consider both the women of the TV1 News, as well as VTM psychoactive effectively disturbed schizophrenic. They are murderers and rapists. But everyone approves it what they do. Gudula of Bells and Whistles ripped up people's whistle because she wants me to go back to psychiatry. This is a good example of that for which telepathy is used today. Attempts by means a new form of prostitution to brainwash everyone. First there was a period where all people could talk to me through subtle body language. That way they could prove that they also had a second reality and possibly comment on the situation top radio. Nowadays everyone become controlled by voices in his head. Direct contact is prohibited. Some friends abusing my paranoid schizophrenia. They have clearly stated that I can talk with telepathy to the people and in turn begin to use telepathy. Therefore I see crazy things as I walk down the street with someone. The people I see are just talking to entities. It was Saturday night. Again I lay in my bed and tried to sleep. But again this was made impossible by voices in my head. This time it was again rude. "Put your pants." I heard someone say. "I'm not home," replied the girl. "Soon are you going to alter your pants?" After I heard this, I stepped out of my bed and in my living room to smoke a cigarette. I hoped that the girl was not raped. Suddenly I heard someone say well that he does not know. I wondered who they were to rape. Now there is the trick, a trick to women of their feelings for me to help. It is a result of the continued gang rape with telepathy. Everyone in Ghent is schizophrenic. When I was in Carrefour went to get something, the cashier tried to make clear to me through subtle body language that she herself had a psychosis caused by the radio and scandal. "And how many hookers have you been so?" 28. When I went to Sigrid, she tried to pretend that they were listening attentively. For me it was clear that she was confronted with another reality. I think she was with her while I was just working with virtual sex. Apparently made sure that the virtual sex Sigrid lifeless before him staring. Sometimes it was as if I saw her arm move, just like they whistle in her ass to the stabbing was. Recently, a number of prostitutes raped visually in a second reality in a rough way. They have sex in a dream. The correct term in the environment is pounding. Again I hear my neighbor noise of people who are calling to each other. It was clear the show I heard the cops. "What's that girl you done wrong?" I hear someone say. They had not talked to him, I hear someone say. When evening I listened to Top Radio I could directly manipulate the music during the broadcast. For me it was clear that the show was what I was looking for. Apparently the Belgians have a culture that is based on violation of privacy. And it goes really far. Only should not be talked about. The trick has changed. Now they have to satisfy everyone who wants the boobs. All with telepathy, mind you. I see it clearly happen if I walk down the street. So what old greasy bags busy sharing this is what I want. While some 20-year-old hooker to satisfy them with her boobs. Today I am seriously disturbed psychoaffective. I am confronted with feelings that I myself cannot handle. Sometimes I see before me a picture of a woman who fucked doggy style in her asses. Meanwhile, she pulls even with my flute, and then the picture disappeared. Self-consciously experience everything I need. These visual images are usually consciously present with me and care for confused feelings. Personally, I would also like to have sex in a dream. I'd like a hooker all night to keep them. Sometimes it's all girls I know. Recently, I suddenly caught 30 sleeping pills. Maybe it was the intention to agree to lie in a coma. But the pills were bad, and it was a huge bath trip. The blonde who TV1 journal presents a psychoaffective disordered slut controlled by a fool with a dildo. She loves horny for an intimate relationship with the voices in her head. They think the people they're right to overnight women voices in their heads to force dildo sex to have. I myself am against this. As it happens with all people I know in reality. The blonde who has TV1 journal presents visual sex all the time in her second reality. At one point I saw her in my second reality flat fucked. Whenever I see her back at her with such schizophrenic laugh. The dirty slut has no respect. She wants to recreate a mindset change from my illness. My idea is clear. It must stop. Because she is horny to have sex with crapule that killed people with telepathy, she is crazy and they should clearly be fired. I tried it myself with my TV. If you say in your holoecon they begin to laugh and say I'm a whore. It's all part of a brainwashing. Women know through the media that the Holy Ghost is busy. Since then they all want to be satisfied by the flying banana. I see them say by means of subtle body language, you must not interfere with, David. If a girl has feelings for me she is obliged to prostitution to do with telepathy. Still 700 times, I heard her say. Another 700 customers, or something. At night I heard someone say I just want to live like David. That was clearly someone who thinks I cured am. I've actually never felt so bad. My psychosis has been changed to paranoid schizophrenia and it makes me feel not good. Tonight I saw visually to me how many minds a complete astral appearance. They held a girl down at the object that was because she would not be raped. Then they started hitting. Then I saw how they visualized how they all guests to their flute was exhausting. All these images as I saw in a dream. More like a nightmare. Then the images were gone and I saw nothing more. They were probably gone a step further with their virtual gangbang. These ghosts live in a reality that is sometimes just as realistic as the reality may seem. It is a virtual form of prostitution. Ultimately, only a few people who have very sick and perverted life suffering in their minds, but they have some control over women in a way not normally do is. Women are enslaved in their minds. They have psychosis, but are confronted with a concrete reality that there are some ghosts say they must do this or do that. Rumsfeld says there is no concrete evidence wounded in Iraq for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Ultimately, it is important for many people, but for me it was clearly an illegal war. In Iraq, I see the hostage victims all speak to me through subtle body language. For those people as the Godfather Highland show still on the radio is very important. Plus it's an illegal war. These visual images were chasing me. I was really going crazy. At some point I may try it myself once. Only it was too little visual and the feelings were not 100%. I had clearly bad telepathy. I probably should try it yourself because I have an important place in the collective consciousness and that prostitution because people would approve. When I then tried some more things happened. I first saw a visual image, but a second later there was already someone was raping my hooker. In the next phase, all prostitutes tricks that I do not want to talk about. It was clearly prohibited all prostitutes to have sex with me in such a way. This reality is frighteningly realistic. The things that happen are not normal. Some women are controlled in a way that is not normal. They must meet all of the little grill crapule that makes them schizophrenic. E.g. they must forbidden delights doing that in reality are not possible. Moan or sit while in reality they sit beside their love. Then it was I noticed that all my friends do it all visually. I do not have such telepathy. It is to be foolish. If you so confronted with such images of those rapes are you crazy? Of course the street do them all with prostitution. I want Sophie Vanden Bergen, they say. What images you see now? A girl with brown hair and a square. Ha, Mika from the Cosmic will be. Once they have been raped with telepathy, women are trained to be efficient in a rough way to rape. But it's hard to write about. I had thought so much, now that they had telepathy that was going to stop stalking me. Nothing is less true. Because it is so rude to that virtual gangbangs they seek victims through my life. As I walk down the street I see those girls suddenly change suddenly. 17/11 is a day to remember. Now women get the spasms in the virtual world. Even Birgit van Mol during the 7 o'clock news. Each time someone from the mafia distributes a cum shot they want women who get spasms. When I get to my CPA's assistant sat on him had she spasms. Then I have a whole day walking around and people get paranoid by spasms. When I got spasms in the virtual world, there was always a bright light suddenly present. Probably again something paranormal. Nowadays I have less need confirmation for my delusional, I told my doctor. That was what I mentioned to my psychiatrist, but so it was not. I'm still a paranoid schizophrenic in search of the truth of his delusions. Personally, I can now give cums hots. I stick my flute in which women and their ass fries. Immediately following a cum shot. Since then, I'll always look to France 3. I now play a game with the Turks, it racist, not racist. Yet the best cums hots of the women I do not know that I meet on the street. Everyone I know uses telepathy to visually raping women. Which are on one of the horny papacy of which is not normal. Just like they have all the time of ejaculation. Of course they are forced to make impossible delights. And should girls have feelings for me, prostitution do with people I meet on the street. David as a sweet then I piss on her head, my cousin the psychologist with subtle body language. I is so haunted by Dudra various personages who use telepathy. This ensures that the crimes will never be known by everyone. Everyone stands alone. With some people there are gross things happen. Nowadays, everyone is aware that I have an artificial disease. I had a psychosis with my ex, who was on the radio, then I heard her voice in my head. The people know that I have an artificial disease created by the commercial media from Belgium, but supposedly cannot talk about the truth, maybe because the show has been there in the media really was not normal. All the fault of Sophie Vanden Bergen. T is only we who know how rough it is. I heard the voices in my head say. Everyone I know has some virtual prostitutes. That they encounter on the street and they give them at home, then psychosis visually rape in a second reality. If I go to Delhaize, I see strange things. In Delhaize cashiers do some serious prostitution. Should I be sitting up there? Ask them. It's bad to sell weed. I sell very little weed and the people all want virtual sex with telepathy. But I do not pull me. I'll just smoke weed. I'm going to direct research into direct and synchrony. I'm thinking through images on television to show that a real invasion of privacy exists. That way, I hope that I can prove I am the Antichrist. I am the only true European prophet. Meta message that should not be ignored. Why I say that I am the prophet of Nostradamus' book and Revelations and Al. At first I could give them cums hots to whom I wanted. There was the speaking hole. So I thought I was almost healed. But meanwhile the speaking hole disappeared and I again had serious hallucinations. Therefore, I am aware that my illness should not just suddenly disappear. Today, everyone in the gent fist fucking with telepathy. I do too. I walk around on the street and around every girl I meet I start fist fucking. It's gross telepathy. After a long time thinking I had finally understood. I'm the Antichrist because I try to be a prophet and only talks about the invasion of privacy committed by radio and in the year 1999. Therefore there is a synchrony between facts from the news and my life as a paranoid schizophrenic. So mainly because I was a reality show with telepathy which cannot be discussed due to the incident with Radio Plus. And that is again rejected by Islam. But also because I have an important place in the collective consciousness. There are many people who have psychosis and face my reality. Therefore, I now had some years ago made a report with TV1. There was an enormous political value. Now there is still political value, but it is unlikely that my problem will be solved. If a girl has feelings for me, she is obliged to prostitution to do with telepathy. Still 700 times, I heard her say. Another 700 customers, or something. Now you no longer live in reality. I hear my cousin say, the psychologist. As long as you well know, but there may not be discussed. I hear him say afterwards. But in any case, I will never forget the truth. And I also hope that the people in the future will read this book, this way all will not forget. When I came to Nikki said, "Ha, the Antichrist is there." It is good to realize that there are still people who take seriously what I have to say. After Nikki was at one time completely honest regarding the violation of privacy. "Sure, I believe your girlfriend on the radio, and that is that everybody is denied." We then decided together that one cannot talk about it because it's too abstract. I knew I had to think about a good look. Everyone knows that it really happened, but nobody will talk about it. I think it's good that I can talk to someone about. Only now do I need to rethink what I just need vragen. Geloofd je that I am the Antichrist? I asked Lady Dear, glancing in my direction. She clearly knows that it is, but I'm sure they will deny. At one point I was listening to the radio on 100 FM. It was incredibly annoying music from the 60s. So I resisted the post. During the fight I landed on 102.8. Today this is Radio Plus. It is the frequency top radio previously used in Ghent. Just now I was clear even to a post listening to that same music was playing as Radio Plus. It was clearly linked to my word going delusional about invasion of privacy. It did so in my connection with the radio, which I heard in isolation. Even worse, Geert, I hear someone say. She continues to see him.